Well, I said today is the last in the message of this series, and the premise of this series is answering a question. This question is asked in culture, but it also many Christians can have this question, which is this. This is what we've been looking at. Is it possible for two people to stay happy together forever, like people in love? Now, you're tempted to look at the data in culture and think, man, I don't know if that's really possible. Why? Because 50% of marriages in culture today end in divorce. And unfortunately, Christian statistics are not much better than that. So the question is it possible? And down deep, I believe in all of us, we believe, yes, it is. And I believe that's a part of divine design. That God put in our hearts the realization. Why? Because God is a relational God. God said that it wasn't good for humans to live alone. In other words, the idea of marriage was God's intent. It's not a human construct. God put that within us. Why? Because God lives in unity. You know, the idea of that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit can be three united together in one, that blows our mind. But the truth is, when God made marriage, He said the two would become one. And therefore, it is possible, but only if we're willing to follow God's way. In other words, too often in culture today, we take our cues from TikTok, from Instagram, from Facebook, and guess what? We need to get our face in the real book that helps us to understand what God's view and plan is for marriage. Because if you've been with us in this series, we've said this, that to fall in love only requires a pulse. But to stay in love, to have a love that lasts, that requires a plan. Because why? You and I, when we fall in love, that's a noun. But to remain in love, to have a love that lasts, you must turn a noun into a verb. And when Jesus weighed in on this, Jesus always felt that love was a verb. Why? Because when He said the thing that should distinguish His followers from that people would know we are His followers is by the love we have one to another. And He said it this way, a new commandment, not new advice, a new commandment I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. By this will everybody know that you're my followers. Now if you read that in context, in John 13, something had happened that night. What had happened? He washed all of His disciples' feet. And He said to them, do you understand what I have done? If they were honest, they're probably like, no, I don't get it. He said, you call me Master and Lord. He goes, and that's who I am. So if I have washed your feet, this is the example for you, what I want you to do for one another. In other words, to have love that lasts, you have to exercise it. Love is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it atrophies. But when you exercise it, it grows. And so that's why today is so critical. I have something so important to say. The title of today's message is The Right Choice. I want to deal with something that's special, a key to having a love that lasts. Because there is a decision that everyone in a romantic relationship makes daily. It's a kind of fill-in-the-blank choice, okay? We may not be aware that we are making that choice, but today, I want to shed some light on it. In fact, I want to illustrate it today. Hopefully it will stay with you and you will get it. Because everyone who loves makes the choice, and your approach to this choice will have a lot to do with your ability to experience a love that lasts. It's something we do intuitively when we fall in love, but the problem is that people who have been in love can abandon it. It's kind of like having a fire in your fireplace. If you don't continue to feed it, the fire will go out. So that's why I want you to see this, because what we choose will result in either, sabotaging our love relationships or allowing us to experience a love that lasts. But let me hit this first point to help something, and that's this. Listen, love is a choice, not a feeling. Okay? Love is a choice, not a feeling. Well, like Pastor Ken, are there no feelings involved in all that? Oh yeah, there are feelings, But like the old adage said, feelings are the caboose. It's not the engine of the train. And that's why you have to realize it's the choice that matters. Because you have to choose love. And so we're going to look today. There's one verse in particular I'm going to pull out of this. But in 1 Corinthians 13, in fact, if you're a Bible reader, 1 Corinthians is often referred to as what? The love chapter, right? Yeah. Okay, the love chapter. Some of you may have had portions of this read in a wedding ceremony, okay? But it's very familiar, but we're going to read it today out of the Amplified Bible because I love this version of it because it's what I use to challenge my own self because it is a definition of the love of God. Because the love of the world can fade easily, but God is love. So when we choose to love, God is always working on our behalf. So what does God's love look like? Look at this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 4. It says, love endures long and is patient and kind. Love never is envious, nor boils over with jealousy. It's not boastful or vainglorious. It does not display itself haughtily. Now, honestly, that's challenging, but pretty much common sense. Why? Because it's hard to remain in a love relationship with an arrogant person. And if you don't know if you are arrogant, let me just give you the warning sign about this. If you feel like you're never wrong, that it's always your spouse that's at fault, guess what? You're arrogant. Because as humans, we all make mistakes. But someone who's proud always thinks it's the other person. It's somebody else's fault. It's never my fault. And that's hard, okay? But God's love isn't like that. Look at in verse 3, it says, it's not conceited, arrogant, or inflated with pride. It's not rude, unmannerly. It does not act unbecomingly. Love, and this is why I love it in the Amplified Bible. Love, God's love in us. Can I help you with something? The Holy Spirit, the Bible tells us, is living in us. And He makes the love of God abundantly available in our heart. In other words, God is always for your relationships. But it doesn't work if you don't apply it. So God's love in us does not insist on its own right or its own way. Oh, ouch. If we're really honest, many of the arguments that ensue in marriage and in love relationships are purely opinion-based. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, this is the way you need to clean the house. Well, no, that's your opinion. This is the way you need to do. This is the way you need to do this. This is the way you need to do that. And we get into arguments because we think our way is the right way. Okay, am I messing with you too much? But what? Love does not insist on its own rights or its own way. For what? It's not self-seeking. How about this one? It's not touchy or fretful or resentful. In other words, love never attempts to manipulate the person that you love by pouting or giving them the silent treatment. You ever think about this? Giving them the silent treatment may be just what they wanted. Okay? But it's not touchy or fretful or resentful. It takes no account of an evil done to it, pays no attention to a suffered wrong. Are you kidding me? Come on, you may have been raised in a household where your mom or your dad could pull a whole list. Do you know, babe, when 1975 you did such and such and such and such. So you live with a household where people are always bringing up what was wrong. No, it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Okay? That does nobody any good except for if you're just fighting to be right. And you always have a choice. You know what? You can either try to be right or you can be righteous. They're not the same. Okay? Why? Because the Bible says righteousness from God's point of view is leveraging yourself for the sake of somebody else. Being right is all about you. So guess what? You can be alone and always be right. But you're never going to be in a relationship and be that way. Okay? So you can either be right or you can be righteous. Because why? It's not self-seeking. It's not touchy, fretful, or resentful. It takes no account of an evil done to it. Pays no attention to a suffered wrong. It does not rejoice at injustice or unrighteousness, but rejoices when right and truth prevail. Now, all of that seems kind of common sense, and it sounds challenging, but we can understand it. But what I want to focus on is verse 7, because it is the key to love that lasts. In verse 7, the Apostle Paul uses the same Greek word 4 times to connect 4 different thoughts together as one. It's like the 4 sides of a house. If you want a house that remains standing, you need to keep all the sides intact. Okay? And so in essence, he gives us this, and look at it in verse 7. This is in the Amplified. It says, love bears up under anything and everything that comes. It is ever ready to believe the best of every person. Its hopes are fadeless under all circumstance. It endures everything without weakening. Always ready to believe the best? I mean, come on. Doesn't that make love blind? But here, the pushback, what people would say was like, well, isn't that like a codependent? Isn't that kind of unhealthy, Pastor Ken? Isn't that kind of being naive? But listen, verse 7 is a principle that we need to understand. And let me help you by illustrating this, okay? Because in every relationship, here's the truth that exists. There are always expectations, right? We all have expectations. But then on the other side of the coin, there are always behaviors, okay? And expectations don't always meet behaviors. Many times, often, there are gaps, okay? Expectations. They're going to be home by 5 o'clock. It's 5:30 and they're not here. Expectations. You're going to do the chores that we talked about. Behaviors. They weren't done. Expectations. You're going to pay this bill. The behavior, the bill didn't get paid. Expectations. You're going to call your parents and explain why we can't come to the situation. Behavior, the call was not made. Expectations. You're going to pick up the kids at 3:30. Behavior, call comes at 4 o'clock. Hey, can you pick up the kids? I can't make it today. Am I messing too much in your world? But listen to me. The reality is this. As long as you are human, there will always be a gap. Because if we're really, really honest, we don't live up to our own expectations, much less the expectations of anybody else. Okay? So whenever you have a gap between expectations and behaviors, you have a choice. And this is what I want to get across to you today. You always have a choice. What will you put in that gap? I've tried to explain this to my boys for a long time now. Because you always have a choice. You have a choice either what? To believe the best or assume the worst. Now, you don't know. Whenever there's a gap, you don't know what's going on. You're in the dark. And I've had people say to me, oh no, Pastor Ken, I have a spirit of discernment. I'm like, yeah, that's a spirit of suspicion. Because the Holy Spirit is not a narc. He's not telling off on your spouse. Okay? In other words, you have a choice. Either you will believe the best or assume the worst. This one is easy because we live in a very negative world, okay? The flow of the world is constantly going in a negative way. It's critical. It's suspicious all the time. In fact, all you have to do is watch the news. In fact, I don't encourage it, but listen. Because all that sells on the news is negativity. Because human nature, our fallen human nature, we automatically assume the worst. So it's easy to go negative. This requires a choice. To believe the best is a choice that only we can make. But here's the problem. Whenever there's a gap, what you choose, it always starts right here, right in your head. Okay? And the Bible teaches us, where does spiritual warfare begin? Right here. Okay? And the problem is, whenever there's a gap, what we choose to put in that gap is a factor of 2 things. Number 1, what we see or what we experience. It's 5 o'clock, they're not home. Okay? And the second one, which is harder, okay, which is who we are. Because all of us come into a marriage relationship with our own baggage, our own past experiences, our hurts, our disappointments, our frustrations. We may have grown up in a home that was totally chaotic, and the only idea that we've ever had about marriage is from a brokenness of our parents. Or you may be carrying hurts from people that have hurt you, disappointed you, exes, and all the rest of this stuff. So, you have a choice. When expectations don't come, you can go, well, see, Mom was right. You can't trust a man. They'll always disappoint you. They'll always hurt you. Or, no, Dad was right. You can't trust a woman. She'll spend you out of house and home. Or whatever the case may be. Whatever you choose is the product of a choice that you make, because you have to be honest what you put in that. And so here's the point that I want to make. Okay? Choosing to believe the best. First of all, let me ask this question. Be honest right now with yourself and God. Which way do you naturally go? Do you naturally believe the best? Or do you naturally assume the worst? How does your spouse go? Do they naturally assume the worst? Or do they naturally believe the best? See, what this came out of, I have a number of books by this, but the Gottman Institute is probably the foremost marriage institute in America. Okay? They're located in Seattle, Washington. And they did this research because predominantly people came to the Gottman Institute that were in failing or broken situations maritally. So they came for help, they came for intensives, they came for ways. And the Gottman Institute decided to do research on couples that were happy together, that had been married for over 10 years. Now, their thesis, what they attempted, that they figured their research would do, and their research model was over 1,000 couples. So you're talking about a large swatch, okay? But their thesis was that people who were happy together in marriage, that had been married for over 10 years, okay, that were in love, okay, that they would have to have this tremendous knowledge of each other. They would know each other. They'd know their strengths, their weaknesses, that they wouldn't have expectations of it. Why? Because the couples that were struggling, the couples that were failing in the relationship had totally different ideas about each other. They never did, so they figured that these people, this had to be the opposite. But guess what they discovered? It was not what they thought at all. Because when they brought couples together, okay, and they asked them to evaluate their spouse, okay? However the spouse evaluated themselves, their spouse would always evaluate the person they were married to higher than the spouse evaluated their own self. In other words, they believed things about their spouse that their spouse didn't even believe about themselves, okay? Which led them to believe, ultimately, that love, in one sense, was blind, okay? But what they discovered, why this is so powerful, listen. In their research, when they discovered this end of it, this is the conclusion that they made, okay? Spouses with a positive, and this is the word they used, a positive illusion, created an upward spiral of love. In other words, listen to me. This is what automatically, naturally happens when two people are dating. Y'all know this. If you've ever been in this situation, man, you think the person that you're falling in love with, they have no flaws. Well, guess what? They do, but you're not willing to look at that. You're willing to believe the best. You know, your parents can say something, your friends can say something. No. You don't understand them like I understand them, right? Because there's a positive outlook. You're not looking for negative things. You're believing the best. And so what Gottman understood is this illusion created a conviction that they really were that way. That conviction led them to security, that they could trust them. And security fostered intimacy, and intimacy fostered love. Husbands and wives who assume that their spouses have strengths that he or she don't think they have, they possess strong relationships. In other words, maintaining and keeping a positive view of your spouse. So listen carefully. To have a love that lasts, we must, number one, choose to believe the best and not assume the worst whenever there is a gap between expectations and behaviors. There will always be gaps. See, some people will say, you know, the answer, Pastor Ken, is when these two things come together. When they do everything I expect, then we'll have a strong relationship. Well, guess what? One of the biggest reasons for divorce, okay, is unrealistic expectations. Because if you're married to a human, not an AI robot, okay? If you're married to a human, there will always be gaps, okay? And so what you choose to put in the gap will automatically determine the quality of the relationship that you will have. So if you want a love that lasts, You have to choose to believe the best whenever there is a gap, okay? There will always be gaps, and we are the sole person that chooses what we put in the gap. So choose, this is something that Gottman brought out. Choose to find the most generous explanation for your spouse's behavior and believe it. Like, what? Are you kidding me? See, they recognize this because let me give you an example of this, okay? My wife, she's not impatient, she's just intense. My husband's not insensitive, he's just focused. My husband's not cheap, he just cares about the frugality of our finances. My wife doesn't spend too much, she always wants to look her best when I come home at night. Find the most generous explanation to your spouse's behavior and believe it. Choose what you put in the gap, because it all starts in our mind. Couples who learn to discipline themselves and choose to believe the best instead of assume the worst will be generous in their explanations. Number 2, listen, choose to be gracious in dealing with the shortcomings of your spouse. Why? Doesn't God deal with us with grace? And shall I remind us, grace is never something earned. It's something freely given. It's something that's unmerited. Why? Because all of us as humans have fallen short. We all have gaps. We all have areas. But God shows us grace in the midst of it. Grace is not earned. And we all as humans, listen, sometimes we need to remember, we all fall short. In an environment of grace, it fosters acceptance, and acceptance fosters closeness. Okay? So listen. Thirdly, listen. You have to choose to resist the temptation to go negative and remain positive. Why? Because it's easy to go negative. And so we live in a world that everything is negative. I told y'all you need to be in a group, but you need to watch the people you hang out with. Because if you hang out with a bunch of complainers, one thing has never changed. The people of Israel, when they complained in the wilderness, they stayed in the wilderness and didn't go into the promised land. You and I need to realize it's easy to complain, but if you complain, you'll remain. You need to find people that are positive, inspiring, encouraging, and tell you that you can be everything God intended you to be. Staying positive. You have to fight against this. Negativity is like feeding poison to a plant and expecting it to flourish. If you feed negativity to your relationships, they won't flourish. You will kill every aspect of romantic love. Okay? So question, where do you go naturally? Are you quick to assume the worst? Are you quick to go negative? Or do you believe the best? That's a decision only you can make. It is something that we need to train ourselves to do. And it is possible because God is with you. God is in you. He cares about your relationship. Know this. The enemy wants to destroy marriage. Why? Because God designed it, God created it. And we either cooperate with God or we work against God. And when you go negative, you are working against God whether you realize it or not. Listen to this in 1 Corinthians 13:7 from the NIV translation. It says this, talking about love, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Always protects, yes, protects the integrity of the relationship. It guards against negativity. In other words, if your parents are calling you on the phone, or your friends, or your sister, or your brother, and they're talking against your spouse, you need to click it and hang it up. You say, wait a minute, that's offensive. Yeah, because God said this. What God has joined together, let no person, I don't care how close they are to you, divide that relationship. You are in control more than you realize. See, we want sympathy. Oh, we want someone to feel bad for us. But guess what? Sympathy will keep you alone. Compassion will cause you to make the right decisions. And they're not one and the same. So you got to guard that end of it because it's easy to go negative. It always protects. It always trusts. Why? Because it's always looking for a generous explanation for the behaviors and believes them. It always chooses to believe the best. It always hopes. Why? Hopes that there's a good explanation. Hope means that what? We're willing to believe that there's something good out of this end. Hope is a positive outlook on the future. It always hopes, always preserves. Meaning, in other words, it stays standing and looks to fight the good fight because our relationships are worth fighting for. Too many people are willing to be just lay it down and walk away. We live in a society today that think marriage is disposable. Okay? That I can change it like I change my underwear. Guess what? Okay? You can recognize that to have a love that lasts, you have to fight for it. You have to believe for that. So question, how are you doing in this? Where do you go naturally? Have you and your spouse gotten into a cycle of negativity? And listen to me, if you're not married, if you're single in the house and you want to be someday, this is just as relevant to you. Learn now before you try, because it's easier to build the foundation correct than when you're in a storm trying to fix something that's already hurting. Okay? So choosing to believe the best. We do you go with this? Are you willing to believe the worst? Listen. You say, but Pastor Ken, there's history. Are you trying to say that we don't have any tough conversations? No, I'm not saying that at all. But see, choosing to believe the worst, even if there's history, every time you choose to go negative, hear me, you contribute to the demise of the relationship and become a participant in destroying the relationship. Because you are pouring poison onto it. And there's no hope for it if you go there. See, in a love relationship that lasts, someone in love that you're in love with, I don't care how bad the relationship is, listen to me. Nobody wants to disappoint somebody, okay, that they're in love with. But if all they've ever gotten, if all you've ever done in the midst of the relationship is to assume the worst, if they're running late, you know why they don't call? Because if negativity is where you respond, nobody wants to hear the other end of the phone. You answer it, and it's like, "Roar!" Or you walk in the house, and it's like, oh my God. Nobody wants to be in a situation like that. Okay? That's not what God intended. When you go negative, you know what you communicate? That you will never measure up. You're not good enough. And what it does is repel the other person. It pushes them away. Because nobody ever feels good in an environment where they feel like they can never measure up. They can never meet another person's desire or expectations. Nobody thrives in that environment. It kills it in every way. And so, you need to recognize this. You could feel the answer for them is just those two things coming together. But that will just destroy your relationship because that's an unrealistic expectation. See, when you choose to believe the best, you create trust. And trust is the basis of a healthy relationship. So choosing to believe the best creates trust. When you choose to trust by believing the best, it creates closeness. It provides margin. See, when people believe the best in you, it brings the best out of you. When people believe in you, think about some of the most impactful relationships you've ever had in your life. When people saw something in you, they believed something in you that you didn't even see in yourself. It helped you aspire. It helped you grow. It helped you become the best version of you ever experienced. And when you live in a love relationship by somebody that's choosing to believe the best in you, you thrive. You're automatically drawing toward them. Because why? Negativity repels somebody. But trust is magnetic. It pulls you together. And that's what you need to recognize. Because why? Trust communicates acceptance. See, acceptance recognizes that I believe in you. I believe the best about you. In that environment of acceptance, then we don't fear rejection. Because as human beings, that's what all of us fear. To be rejected. Negativity is a form of rejection, whether you realize it or not. But trust communicates acceptance. Trust in a relationship means acceptance. And acceptance communicates that you have not disappointed me. So how would that sound? in a relationship? Well, let me give you an example. Honey, I'm running late. And here's the response on the other end of the phone. Okay? That's all right. You take your time. I'll be here waiting for you. Honey, I forgot to pay the bill. Okay? Here's the response on the other end. It's okay. We'll figure it out together. I know you've been busy. I know you've had a lot going on right now. It's all right. We'll get through this together. Honey, I spent a little more on Amazon than I intended. It's all right, babe. We'll cut back in some other areas. We'll figure all of this out together. You're like, what household is that from? Exactly. Because why? Don't use the gap. Listen to me. Don't use the gap to make a point. Okay? Use the gap to create trust and foster closeness. Because again, if you use the gap to create a point, you know what? You'll actually be voting for your spouse to make mistakes so you can be right. See, being right can assure one thing. You'll be on your own and you'll always be right. But you can either be right or you can be righteous. Okay? Closeness, because when somebody else puts trust in the gap and believes the best about you, it draws you to them instead of repelling you from them. Negativity repels us, and trust is magnetic. So listen to me. Jesus weighed in on this. We know this, but actively practicing it, in Luke 6:31, it says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Think about this. When you fall short, when you have a gap, what do you want somebody to put in that gap? Do you want somebody to be this way? Or do you want someone to be that way? Do unto someone else as you would have them do unto you. Because in that environment, love thrives. In that environment, you can stay together forever, happy, like people in love. Because why? Here's the point that I want to close with. Happy couples who experience a love that lasts learn to believe the best. Is that simple? Yes. Is that easy? No. But you know what? You can do it because God is with you. God is in you. And God is more for your marriage than you can even begin to